Welcome to David's Stories. Today we follow Granville Moreno, a retired prosecutor betrayed by his daughter and son-in-law who schemes to reclaim his home through meticulous evidence and legal strategy, finding justice but losing family. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly tales of truth and triumph. Share below. Let's start. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth as I pulled into the gravel driveway of my home in Houston's Memorial District. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn I'd mowed 1,000 times, the oak tree I'd planted when Lucretia was born, swaying gently in the February breeze. 7 days at Lake Conroe, casting lines into still waters, had left me refreshed, my mind sharp despite the weight of 63 years. But something was wrong. The key in my hand, brass, worn smooth from decades of use, didn't fit the front door. I turned it again, harder this time, as if willpower could reshape the metal. The lock resisted its mechanism, alien, unyielding. I stepped back, squinting at the door in the fading light. The deadbolt wasn't my quickset. It was a Schlage, its polished surface, mocking me with its newness. My pulse quickened not from fear but from a prosecutor's instinct honed over 35 years of sniffing out lies. Someone had been here. Someone had changed things. I examined the key under the porch light, its familiar teeth glinting like a puzzle piece that no longer fit. My house built with sweat and sacrifice over 3 decades, felt like a stranger. I walked the stone pathway I'd laid myself 15 years ago, each pebble crunching under my boots, a rhythm as familiar as my own heartbeat. The side gate's combination lock still responded to the code, Lucretia's birthday reversed. Some things it seemed they hadn't bothered to touch. The backyard was unchanged, frozen in time. The oak tree stood sentinel, its bare branches clawing at the twilight sky. The patchy winter grass crunched underfoot as I approached the back door. I tried the key again. Same story, another new lock. Through the kitchen window, the granite countertops I'd saved 2 years to install gleamed under the fluorescent light. A shadow moved upstairs, a flicker behind the curtains in the master bedroom. Someone was home, walking through rooms I'd called mine for 32 years. I returned to my pickup truck, the leather seat still warm from the drive. My phone rested in the cup holder, its dark screen patient waiting. I sat there staring at the house that no longer welcomed me, and felt the first stirrings of something primal. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet, coiled resolve. I'd seen betrayal in courtrooms in the eyes of defendants who swore innocence while their hands dripped with guilt. But this was personal. This was my blood. 3 months ago I'd sensed the shift. Lucretia's visits had grown frequent. Too frequent, her questions sharp and probing, cloaked in casual concern. "Dad, have you updated your will?" she'd ask over coffee, her eyes darting to the corners of the room. "What about your estate? You've got everything organized, right?" Edwin, her husband, would linger by the fireplace, pretending to admire old family photos, while his gaze tracked every word. Once I'd caught him measuring the living room walls with a tape measure, his grin too quick, too practiced. "Just thinking about renovations," he'd said. "This place has potential." Potential! The word had lingered. A snake coiling in my mind. I'd smiled, offered him coffee, but inside something clicked, a switch flipping from father to prosecutor. I'd spent 35 years cataloging evidence, reading people, dismantling lies. That instinct whispered, now telling me to listen, to watch, to prepare. I opened my phone, navigated to the recording app I'd downloaded 3 months ago. Simple interface, red button to start, black to stop. As an assistant district attorney, I'd never needed it. Interrogation rooms had their own systems, but retirement meant relying on my own tools, my own evidence. I pressed record, set the phone on the dashboard, and dialed Lucretia's number. The speaker hummed to life, its microphone ready to catch every word. She answered on the 3rd ring. "What do you want?" "No warmth, no." "Hi, Dad, no." "How was your trip?" Just cold irritation, like I was an intruder in her life. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady, pleasant even. "Lucretia, my key doesn't work. What happened to the locks?" A pause heavy with unspoken calculations. Then her voice cut through sharp and triumphant. "Those aren't your locks anymore, Dad. This is our house now, mine and Edwin's. You should find somewhere else to stay, old man. Maybe a shelter would take you." The words stung venomous, but I didn't flinch. I heard shuffling. Then Edwin's voice louder, brasher than I'd ever known it. "Yeah, listen up, Granville. We own this place now. Got all the paperwork done legal and everything. We're selling it next week to clear my debts, $340,000. You had your time living comfortable. Now it's our turn." $340,000. The number hung in the air, a confession so blatant it felt like a gift. My lips curved into a smile not of joy but of clarity. They'd shown their hand, and it was weaker than they thought. "I see," I said, my tone calm, almost amused. "Enjoy your evening, then." I ended the call, replayed the last 10 seconds. Edwin's voice boomed through the speaker, every word, damning the debt, the ownership claim, the plan to sell. Crystal clear. I opened my email, attached the audio file to a draft I'd prepared weeks ago. 3 words in the subject line. Our plan worked. I sent it to Margaret Chen, my lawyer, a woman with eyes sharp enough to cut through lies and a mind built for battles like this. The file was 47 seconds long, short, but long enough to bury them. I started the truck, the engine's rumble grounding me as I backed out of the driveway without glancing at the house. The streets of Houston unfolded before me, the city's pulse steady under the darkening sky. I took Woodway to 610, then exited on West Dallas, the route as familiar as my own skin. 25 minutes later, I parked outside a modest apartment complex in Midtown. Brick exterior staircases, the kind of place where shadows clung to corners and secrets stayed buried. 2 months ago, I'd rented apartment 2F, paid 6 months up front in cash, listed my name as the sole tenant. The key to 2F slid into the lock perfectly, a small victory after the morning's betrayal. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. A 1-bedroom unit, sparse but functional. A galley kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch and TV, a single window overlooking the city's jagged skyline. On the kitchen table sat a manila folder, its tab labeled Moreno Evidence File, in my own precise handwriting. I dropped my fishing gear bag by the door, pulled out a chair, and sat. The folder felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of my daughter's betrayal had seeped into the paper. I opened it slowly, revealing 3 months of meticulous work, a yellow legal pad filled with dated observations, a flash drive labeled security footage, kitchen bank statements showing transfers I'd made in January, photographs of Edwin's silver Lexus parked outside my house at odd hours, midnight, on a Tuesday, 6 a.m. on a Thursday. The kind of hours that screamed intent, calculation, greed. 3 months ago, the first thread of suspicion had unraveled. Lucretia's visits had shifted from rare to relentless, her questions too pointed, her smiles too forced. Edwin's presence had grown heavier, his eyes always watching, measuring. I'd caught him photographing the house once, his phone angled to capture the crown molding the hardwood floors, the kitchen appliances I'd upgraded 2 years ago. "Just ideas for our place," he'd said, but his hands trembled slightly, betraying him. I'd known then that something was coming. Not what, not yet. But the air had changed, like the stillness before a storm. I'd started watching them the way I'd watched defendants in court, reading their movements, their silences. I'd installed a wireless camera in my study, disguised as a book spine, its lens trained on the kitchen table. I'd begun tracking Edwin's car, noting its patterns. I'd opened a new bank account, transferred my savings, and moved my vintage car collection, 3 restored beauties worth $120,000, into a new LLC. Moreno Holdings, a fortress to protect what was mine. The folder on the table was more than evidence. It was a map of their betrayal and my counterstrike. I spread its contents across the surface. The legal pad, the flash drive, Margaret's business card with her cell number scrawled on the back. A thin stack of photos showed Edwin's Lexus lurking in my driveway, its silver gleam a ghost in the night. Each piece was a thread, and I'd woven them into a net they wouldn't escape. I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the war brewing in my life. Lucretia's voice echoed in my mind. "This is our house now, old man." And for a moment I let myself feel the wound. She was my daughter, my only child, the girl I'd raised under that oak tree's shade. But she'd chosen this path, and I'd chosen mine. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man who'd spent decades dismantling schemes like hers. And I was ready. The fishing trip had been no accident. 7 days away, long enough for desperation to override caution, for their greed to push them into the open. I'd left the house unguarded, or so they thought, knowing they'd see it as their chance. The new locks, the brazen claim of ownership, the recorded confession, it was all part of the design. They thought they'd stolen my home, but they'd walked into my trap. I closed the folder, stood, and walked to the window. Houston's skyline glittered, a mosaic of ambition and secrets. Somewhere out there, Lucretia and Edwin were celebrating, unaware that the ground beneath them was already crumbling. I thought of the oak tree in my backyard, its roots deep and unyielding, like the resolve now burning in my chest. This wasn't just about a house. It was about everything I'd built, everything I was. They'd tried to take it all, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I returned to the table, picked up my phone, and opened the security app. The footage from the kitchen camera waited, a silent witness to their crime. I didn't play it yet. I didn't need to. The truth was already mine, and soon it would be theirs too. The Midtown apartment was a cocoon of silence, save for the faint hum of the city beyond the window. I sat at the kitchen table, the Moreno evidence file open before me, its contents fanned out like a deck of cards in a high-stakes game. Each document, each photograph, each scribbled note was a piece of a puzzle I'd been assembling for 3 months. The weight of Lucretia's betrayal pressed against my chest, but I pushed it aside, letting the prosecutor in me take over. This wasn't about grief. This was about truth, and I'd spent 35 years chasing it. 3 months ago, the first whisper of suspicion had crept into my mind. It was November, the air crisp with the promise of winter, when Lucretia's visits to my memorial home began to shift. She'd always been distant, my daughter, a child of sharp edges and sharper ambitions, but her sudden warmth felt rehearsed, like an actor stepping into a role. She'd arrive unannounced, bearing store-bought pastries, her smile too bright, her questions too precise. "Dad, have you thought about your will lately?" she'd ask, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You know, just to make sure everything's in order." Her eyes never met mine when she spoke, darting instead to the corners of the room, as if mapping its value. Edwin was always there, too, a shadow in her wake. My son-in-law, with his slick grin and restless hands, would linger by the fireplace, pretending to admire the framed photos of Lucretia as a child, her first bike, her high school graduation moments I'd once thought bound us. But his gaze wasn't nostalgic. It was calculating. I caught him once during one of those November visits pulling a tape measure from his pocket. He stretched it across the living room wall, jotting numbers in a small notebook. "Just thinking about renovation ideas," he said when I raised an eyebrow. "This place has so much potential." That word again, potential. It hung in the air like a warning. I'd smiled, offered him coffee, but inside my mind was racing. 35 years as an assistant district attorney had taught me to read people, to spot the tells of deceit, the fidgeting hands, the too quick explanations, the eyes that wouldn't hold steady. Edwin's were all there, and Lucretia's questions were no coincidence. They were probing, testing, like thieves casing a mark. That night, as I sat in my study, the house quiet except for the creak of its old bones, I knew something was coming. Not a vague unease, but a certainty as clear as the gavel's strike in a courtroom. I began to watch them, not overtly, no accusations, no confrontations, but with the precision of a man who'd built cases against murderers and fraudsters. I started small, noting the frequency of their visits in a yellow legal pad I kept locked in my desk. November 12th. Lucretia asked about my estate planning. November 15th. Edwin photographed the kitchen appliances. November 20th. Both arrived unannounced. Edwin pacing the dining room, Lucretia asking about my health insurance. Each entry was a thread, and I was weaving a tapestry of their intent. By December, I'd escalated my vigilance. I purchased a wireless security camera, a discreet unit disguised as a leather-bound book, and placed it on the study shelf overlooking the kitchen table. Its lens was invisible, its feed accessible via an app on my phone. I tested it one night watching the grainy footage of my empty kitchen, the granite countertops gleaming under the moonlight. It felt like a violation spying in my own home, but necessity outweighed sentiment. If they were planning something, I'd need proof, not suspicions. I also began tracking Edwin's movements. His silver Lexus, ostentatious for a man who never seemed to hold a steady job, appeared in my driveway at odd hours. I'd wake to the crunch of gravel at midnight, peer through the blinds, and see his car idling its headlights cutting through the darkness. Once at 6 a.m., I caught him standing on the front lawn, staring at the house like a predator sizing up its prey. I snapped photos from my bedroom window. The timestamps burned into the images. 12:03 a.m., November 28th, 6:14 a.m., December 4th. Each one went into the folder a silent accusation. The more I watched, the clearer their motives became. Edwin's debts were no secret. Lucretia had let slip once in a rare moment of frustration that he owed hundreds of thousands to creditors. Gambling, she'd said, though she quickly changed the subject. I didn't press her then, but I started digging. As an emergency contact on their joint bank account, a holdover from when I'd helped Lucretia start her salon, I had access to duplicate statements. I requested them quietly through a back channel at the bank, a favor from an old colleague. The statements arrived in mid-December, a stack of paper revealing a grim truth: $89,000 withdrawn in 6 months, siphoned into crypto exchanges, online poker sites, and cash advances with predatory interest rates. Edwin was drowning, and my house worth $580,000 was his lifeboat. I leaned back in the apartment's creaky chair, the memory of those statements sharp in my mind. The folder before me held copies of them, each transaction highlighted in yellow, a map of desperation. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed them to act, to reveal themselves fully. That's when I devised the plan, a trap so subtle they'd never see it coming, yet so precise it would bind them in their own lies. In early January, I printed a power of attorney form from a legal website, the kind that grants authority to sell property. I left the signature line blank, tucked it into a manila envelope alongside a copy of my house deed. The documents were bait, gleaming with promise, placed prominently on the kitchen table before Lucretia and Edwin's scheduled Sunday dinner on January 12th. I invited them over, cooked a simple meal, roast chicken, potatoes, nothing to arouse suspicion, and waited. At 3:45 p.m., as we sat around the table, I excused myself to the bathroom. I ran the water intermittently, letting the sound mask my absence, and stayed there for 15 minutes. Plenty of time for curiosity to override caution. When I returned, the envelope's corner was slightly bent. The deed rotated just a fraction. They'd taken the bait. That night, I opened the security app on my phone. The camera had captured everything. At 3:47 p.m., Edwin glanced toward the hallway where I'd disappeared. Lucretia nodded once, a silent signal. He pulled out his phone, activated the camera, and began photographing the documents. First, the power of attorney snapping multiple angles. Then the deed zooming in on my name, the property description, the legal jargon. His hands shook slightly, betraying nerves, but he was thorough, checking the bathroom door twice before arranging the papers back in place. 12 minutes of footage, every second a confession. I backed it up to 3 separate cloud accounts, each password a fortress. I stood from the table, pacing the small apartment, the memory of that footage igniting a spark of satisfaction. They thought they were clever, but they were amateurs playing against a man who dismantled professionals. Still, I needed more than footage. I needed a partner in this fight, someone who could navigate the legal battlefield as deftly as I once had. That's when I found Margaret Chen. I'd heard her name in legal circles, a young attorney mid-40s with a reputation for slicing through fraud cases like a blade through silk. I walked into her office on Travis Street 3 weeks ago carrying the manila folder. Her office was sparse functional, but her eyes were sharp, assessing me the moment I stepped inside. "Mr. Moreno," she said, gesturing to a chair. "You mentioned property fraud on the phone. Tell me everything." I laid out the evidence, the legal pad, the photos, the bank statements, the footage I hadn't yet shown her. "I'm letting them steal from me," I said, my voice steady. "And I need you to help me send them to prison for it." Her eyebrows rose, but her expression didn't waver. "Entrapment's a risk if we're not careful," she said, leaning forward. "But if they act on their own and we just document it, I can work with that. It'll cost you, though. This isn't simple." We spent 43 minutes dissecting the case. She took notes in shorthand, her pen moving like a metronome, pausing only to ask pointed questions. "When did you first notice Edwin's car at odd hours? How certain are you of the bank statement access? What's your endgame here?" I answered. Each one my voice calm but resolute. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, about protecting what was mine. Margaret agreed to take the case, her retainer a crisp $8,000 check I wrote without hesitation. We moved quickly to protect my assets. I transferred my vintage car collection, 3 restored vehicles, worth $120,000 into Moreno Holdings, the LLC I'd formed weeks earlier. My investment portfolio, another $340,000, followed safe behind legal walls. I opened a new bank account, moving $180,000 in liquid savings, leaving just $15,000 in my personal account, enough to avoid suspicion, not enough to tempt fate. The house, though, I left in my name. It was the perfect bait, a $580,000 prize they couldn't resist. "They'll go for it," Margaret had said, signing the incorporation papers. "Desperate people always do." Back in the apartment, I opened the folder again, my fingers tracing the edges of the legal pad. November 12th, November 15th, November 20th. Each entry a step toward this moment. The camera footage, the bank statements, the photos of Edwin's Lexus. They were more than evidence. They were a narrative, a story I'd written in silence, waiting for its climax. I thought of Lucretia, her voice on the phone cold and triumphant, calling me an old man, a homeless bum. The pain was there, sharp and raw, but I buried it beneath purpose. She was my daughter, but she'd chosen her side. I walked to the window, the city's lights flickering like stars in a storm. The oak tree in my backyard came to mind, its roots deep, unyielding, a symbol of everything I'd built. They thought they could uproot it, but they didn't know the ground they stood on was mine. The fishing trip had been the final piece, a calculated absence to draw them out. 7 days at Lake Conroe, long enough for their greed to override caution, for their plan to solidify. I'd left the house unguarded, the documents exposed, knowing they'd see it as their moment to strike. The phone buzzed, pulling me back to the present. A text from Patrick, my neighbor 3 houses down, a retired English teacher with a knack for noticing details. "Granville saw your truck gone all week. Everything okay? Your daughter and her husband were moving around inside last night late. Looked like they were celebrating. Want me to keep an eye out?" Attached was a photo, my house, every light blazing. Edwin carrying a cardboard box, Lucretia raising a wine glass toward the chandelier I'd bought in 1998. I typed back, "Thanks, Patrick. Everything's under control. Appreciate the extra eyes. Let me know if anything else seems off." I saved the photo to the folder, another thread in the net. The apartment felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of what was to come. I sat again, opened my laptop, and began drafting a timeline update, cross-referencing Patrick's photo with the security footage. The pieces were falling into place, but the mystery wasn't fully unraveled. Why now? Why this brazen Edwin's debts explained part of it, but Lucretia's role, her willingness to betray me, felt deeper, darker, like a secret I hadn't yet uncovered. I thought of my late wife Ellen, her laughter filling the house in better days. She'd have been heartbroken by Lucretia's choices, but she'd have trusted me to handle it. And I would. Not with rage, but with precision, with the cold clarity of a man who'd spent a lifetime dismantling lies. The trap was set, the evidence gathered, and the players were moving exactly as I'd predicted. But something told me there was more to this game, something hidden waiting in the shadows. I closed the laptop, stood, and poured a glass of water. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the storm brewing in my life. I raised the glass to the window, a silent toast to the oak tree, to Ellen, to the man I'd become. They thought they'd stolen my home, but they'd only stolen a moment. The real fight was just beginning, and I was ready. The Midtown apartment was a fortress of solitude, its bare walls and sparse furniture a stark contrast to the home I'd built over decades. The Moreno evidence file lay open on the kitchen table, its contents a constellation of truths I'd gathered to reclaim what was mine. Outside, Houston's skyline glittered under a moonless night, the city's pulse a faint drumbeat against the silence of my resolve. I'd known for months that Lucretia and Edwin were plotting, but now, with their brazen claim of my house and Edwin's voice on that recorded call, "We're selling it next week to clear my $340,000 in debts," the game had shifted. They'd stepped into my trap, and I was ready to tighten the net. The fishing trip to Lake Conroe had been no whim. 7 days away, long enough for their desperation to boil over, for their greed to push them into the open. I'd left the house unguarded, or so they thought, with a power of attorney form and a copy of the house deed left on the kitchen table like bait on a hook. The wireless camera disguised as a book spine on my study shelf had captured their every move. The footage was my ace: 12 minutes of Edwin photographing the documents, his hands trembling, Lucretia's nod sealing their conspiracy. But it wasn't enough. I needed more, something undeniable. Something that would bury them in a courtroom. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and opened my laptop. The security app glowed on the screen, the time-stamped footage from January 12th waiting like a confession carved in stone. I played it again, not because I needed to, but because each viewing sharpened my focus. At 3:47 p.m., Edwin glanced toward the hallway where I'd excused myself to the bathroom. Lucretia's nod was subtle, a flicker of complicity. He pulled out his phone. Snapped photos of the power of attorney. Multiple angles, meticulous, then the deed. Zooming in on my name. The property lines, the legal jargon. His hands shook, betraying nerves, but he was thorough, checking the bathroom door twice before sliding the papers back into place. 12 minutes every second, a nail in their coffin. I backed up the footage to 3 cloud accounts, each password a labyrinth only I could navigate. Then I opened my email. The draft to Margaret Chen still there. The audio file attached, the subject line. Stark. Our plan worked. I added a note. They took the bait. Footage secured. Call me. I hit send, the message vanishing into the digital ether. A signal flare to my ally in this war. Margaret's response came within 10 minutes, her text as sharp as her mind. Received. In office tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring everything. I set the phone down, my fingers lingering on the folder. The legal pad inside was a chronicle of their betrayal. Each entry a step toward this moment. November 12th. Lucretia's questions about my will. November 20th. Edwin's late-night visit. December 4th, his Lexus at dawn. The photographs of his car, the bank statements showing $89,000 siphoned into gambling dens and crypto scams, Margaret's business card with her cell number scrawled on the back. All of it was a narrative I'd written in silence, a story they didn't know they were starring in. But there was something else, a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Lucretia's betrayal wasn't just about money. Edwin's debts explained his hunger, but her coldness. This is our house now. Old man felt personal, like a wound she'd been nursing for years. I thought of Ellen, my late wife, her laughter filling the house in better days. Lucretia had been her shadow, her spark, but somewhere along the way that spark had turned to ash. I pushed the thought away. Emotions could wait. Evidence couldn't. The next morning I drove to Margaret's office on Travis Street, the folder tucked under my arm like a shield. Houston was waking its streets a tangle of ambition and hurry, but I moved with purpose, my truck cutting through the morning haze. Margaret's office was a study in efficiency. A single desk, a bookshelf lined with legal tomes, a window framing the city's glass towers. She stood when I entered, her dark suit crisp, her eyes scanning me like a judge weighing a witness. "Granville," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Show me what you've got." I spread the folder's contents across her desk, each piece laid out with the precision of a closing argument. The legal pad, the flash drive, the photographs, the bank statements. I played the audio file first, Edwin's voice filling the room. "We own this place now, legal and everything." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, her pen scratching notes in shorthand. "This is gold," she said, pausing the recording. "But the footage, show me." I opened my laptop, navigated to the security app, and played the January 12th clip. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes locked on the screen as Edwin and Lucretia betrayed themselves. When it ended, she sat back, her expression a mix of admiration and caution. "You've built a case most prosecutors dream of," she said. "But entrapment's a risk. We need to prove they acted on their own." "They did," I said, my voice steady. "I left documents in my own house. They chose to photograph them, to forge my signature, to change the locks. I just gave them the rope." She nodded, her pen tapping the desk. "We'll need more. The audio and footage are strong, but we need corroboration, witnesses, paper trails." "Anything else you've got?" I slid the bank statements across the desk. Edwin's burned through $89,000. And now dollars in 6 months. Crypto poker cash advances. He's desperate and my house is his way out. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she scanned the highlighted transactions. "Motive," she said. "This shows why, but we need to show how. If they've forged documents, we need the notary, the paperwork, the trail." "I'm working on it," I said. "Patrick, my neighbor, saw them last night celebrating in my house. He sent a photo, Edwin with a box, Lucretia with a wine glass. They're already acting like it's theirs." "Send me that photo," she said, her voice sharp. "And keep Patrick on speed dial. He's a witness now." I nodded, texting her the image from my phone. "There's something else," I said, hesitating. "Lucretia's not just following Edwin's lead. There's something deeper, something I haven't figured out. Her voice on that call, it wasn't just greed. It was personal." Margaret studied me, her gaze piercing. "Family cases always are, but don't let it cloud your judgment. We stick to the evidence." She was right, but the shadow in my mind lingered. I left her office with a plan: keep watching, keep gathering, keep tightening the net. Back in the apartment, I opened the folder again, adding Patrick's photo to the stack. The image was grainy, but it told a story. Lucretia raising her glass. Edwin hauling a box, my house lit up like a stage for their victory. I wondered what was in that box, what else they'd taken, or planned to take. Over the next week, I became a ghost in my own life. I didn't return to the memorial house, didn't call Lucretia, didn't let them know I was watching. Instead, I dug deeper. I contacted my old colleague at the bank, requesting more statements from Lucretia and Edwin's joint account. The new batch arrived 2 days later, revealing another $10,000 withdrawn, this time to a company called Pinnacle Capital, a lender known for predatory rates. I cross-referenced the dates with Edwin's late-night visits to my house. A pattern emerged: every withdrawal followed a visit, as if he was scouting, planning, building his nerve. I also reached out to Marcus Herman, an antique dealer I'd worked with in 2010. My Victorian settee and Chippendale table, worth $15,000 combined, were still in the house, items Edwin had eyed during his renovation charade. I called Marcus, my voice casual but deliberate. "If anyone tries to sell those pieces, let me know. They're mine, and they're not for sale." Got it, Granville, he said, his tone warm but curious. Everything okay? Just keeping an eye on things, I said, hanging up. Another thread in the net. The real breakthrough came unexpectedly. On the third day after my return from Lake Conroe, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, a habit from my prosecutor days. The message was from Darlene Webb, a notary public I'd never met. Her voice was shaky, urgent. Mr. Moreno, I notarized a power of attorney for your daughter and her husband 2 weeks ago. I didn't see you sign it. They said you were in the car, too frail to come in. I'm worried I made a mistake. Please call me back. I sat up, the air in the apartment suddenly electric. This was it, the missing link. I called Margaret immediately, relaying the message. She's nervous, I said. She knows she broke protocol. If we get her to testify, it's game over. Set up a meeting, Margaret said. Neutral ground. I'll handle the legal framing. I called Darlene back, arranging to meet at a coffee shop on Westheimer Road the next morning. The place was busy, filled with the clatter of cups and the murmur of conversations, a perfect veil for our discussion. Darlene was a small woman, mid-50s, her hands fidgeting with a napkin as she sat across from me. I'm so sorry, Mr. Moreno, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They were convincing. Lucretia showed me a photo of you in a car, said you were ill. I notarized the signature on the form. Did you see me in person? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. No, she admitted, her eyes dropping. I should have, but Edwin was pushy. Kept checking his watch, saying you were waiting outside. I leaned forward, my prosecutor's instinct guiding me. Darlene, you're not in trouble yet, but I need you to write a statement, everything you remember. Will you do that? She nodded, tears welling. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. That afternoon, I delivered Darlene's handwritten statement to Margaret's office. It detailed the date, January 28th, the time, and Edwin's pressure tactics. Margaret read it, her expression unreadable. This is solid, she said. If she testifies, it proves forgery. But we need to lock it in. I'll draft an affidavit for her to sign. The net was tightening, but I wasn't done. Back in the apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up Lucretia's phone records, accessed legally through my emergency contact status. 2 days before the notarization, she'd searched for elderly man in car stock photo. The exact image was saved in her browser cache. A grainy picture of a stranger, not me. I downloaded the metadata, another piece of evidence, another nail. The next evening, Patrick texted again. Granville, they're at it again. Moving furniture around, lights on all night. Saw Edwin carrying what looked like your settee to his car, then putting it back. Weird. You sure everything's okay? Attached was another photo, time-stamped, 11:47 p.m., showing Edwin struggling with the settee in my driveway, Lucretia watching from the porch. I texted back, Thanks, Patrick. Keep watching. I've got this. I saved the photo. My jaw tightening. They were unraveling, their confidence cracking under the weight of their own greed. I called Marcus Herman, updating him. Edwin might try to sell the settee. If he does, document everything. Consider it done, Marcus said, his voice firm. I don't deal with thieves. By week's end, the folder was thicker, heavier with the weight of their mistakes. Darlene's statement, the phone records, Patrick's photos, the bank statements, the footage, the audio. It was a case any prosecutor would kill for. But the shadow in my mind grew darker. Lucretia's role wasn't just complicity. There was something else, something I couldn't name. A memory surfaced, her 10th birthday, when she'd climbed the oak tree in the backyard, laughing, as Ellen and I watched from below. Where had that girl gone? What had turned her into this? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the plan. Margaret and I met again, this time at a diner near the courthouse, the kind of place where cops and lawyers traded stories over greasy coffee. She spread the evidence across the table, her eyes gleaming. We've got them, she said. The notary, the footage, the audio, the financials. It's airtight, but we need to file with the police soon before they try to sell the house. Agreed, I said. But I want one more piece, something to show intent beyond the documents. She raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Edwin's not done making mistakes, I said. He's desperate and desperate people get sloppy. Let's give him another chance to slip. The next morning I drove to a print shop and created a fake letter from a real estate agent expressing interest in buying my house for $600,000. I mailed it to my own address, knowing Lucretia and Edwin would intercept it. The letter was vague enough to seem legitimate, but enticing enough to push them into action. I installed a second camera, this one in the mailbox, its tiny lens hidden in a crack. If they took the letter, I'd have them on video again, plotting to sell what wasn't theirs. 2 days later, the camera caught them. Edwin opened the mailbox at 7:32 a.m., pulled out the letter, and showed it to Lucretia. Her eyes widened, and she nodded, her lips moving in words the camera couldn't hear. They went inside, and I knew they were planning their next move. I downloaded the footage, added it to the folder, and called Margaret. They took the bait again, I said. Video's in your inbox. She laughed, a rare sound. Granville, you're a menace. This is conspiracy to commit fraud caught on tape. The evidence was complete, but the mystery lingered. Why had Lucretia turned so cold? Was it Edwin's influence or something deeper, something tied to the years after Ellen's death? I remembered a fight we'd had when she was 20. Her accusing me of being too controlling, too focused on my career. I'd thought we'd moved past it, but maybe I'd missed something. A resentment that had festered, waiting for a moment like this. I stood at the apartment's window, the city's lights a constellation of secrets. The oak tree in my mind loomed larger, its roots a symbol of what I was fighting for, not just a house, but a legacy, a life built with love and loss. They thought they could take it, but they didn't know the man they were facing. The trap was set, the evidence gathered, and the next move was mine. The fluorescent lights of the Harris County Police Headquarters buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the scuffed linoleum of the Economic Crimes Division. I stood beside Margaret Chen near the entrance, the Moreno evidence file tucked under my arm, its weight a reminder of the battle ahead. The air smelled of burnt coffee and bureaucracy, a scent I knew well from my years as a prosecutor. Outside, Houston's February humidity clung to the city like a second skin, but inside the atmosphere was sharp, electric, with purpose. Today we'd set the trap's final pieces in motion, turning my evidence into a weapon. Margaret's dark suit was crisp, her briefcase a shield of professionalism. She glanced at me, her eyes steady but probing. Ready, Granville. Once we hand this over, there's no turning back. I've been ready since November, I said, my voice low but firm. The folder in my hands held everything. The audio of Edwin's confession, the security footage of their document theft, Darlene Webb's statement, Patrick's photos, the bank records, the fake real estate letter. Each piece was a thread in a net I'd woven over months, and now it was time to pull it tight. We passed through metal detectors, the ritual as familiar as breathing, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway was lined with faded posters preaching integrity, their words ironic, given the betrayal I was here to expose. Margaret led the way, her heels clicking with purpose, until we reached the office of Detective Ramon Silva. His nameplate gleamed a small beacon in the chaos of justice. Silva stood when we entered, his handshake firm, his eyes sharp with recognition. Granville Moreno, he said, a smile flickering. 8 years since we last crossed paths. Retirement treating you well, until recently, I said, matching his grip. I'm here to file a complaint. Forgery, property, fraud, theft. My daughter and son-in-law. Silva's smile faded, replaced by the focus of a man who'd seen too many family disputes turn ugly. He gestured to 2 chairs across from his desk. Have a seat. Let's hear it. Margaret took the lead, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Detective Silva, my client's daughter, Lucretia, and her husband, Edwin Carver, forged a power of attorney to claim ownership of his $580,000 home. They changed the locks while he was away and planned to sell it illegally. We have audio, video, financial records, and a notary's statement. She began arranging the evidence on Silva's desk, each piece placed with surgical precision. The timeline of suspicious behavior, the audio file's transcription, the security footage on a flash drive, Darlene's statement, the bank statements, Patrick's photos, the mailbox video. Silva leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. This audio, he said, was it recorded in Texas. Did they know they were being recorded? One-party consent, Margaret said. Mr. Moreno was in his truck in Harris County. They had no expectation of privacy on a phone call. Silva nodded, picking up the audio file's transcription. We own this place now, legal and everything. Selling it next week. He read aloud, his voice steady. This is damning, but I need to verify everything. He dialed an internal extension. I need a rush on document analysis. Possible forgery on a power of attorney. Compare with known signature samples. 3 days. He hung up, turning to me. Granville, I need handwriting samples. Bank cards, old legal documents, anything with your signature. I slid a folder from Margaret's briefcase, 15 samples spanning 20 years each one, a snapshot of my steady hand. Prepared, I said. Silva studied me for a long moment, his gaze searching for cracks, deception, hesitation, anything to suggest I wasn't what I seemed. He wouldn't find any. Looks solid, he said finally. We'll send the power of attorney to our forensic examiner. Ink pressure points, letter formation, if it's forged. We'll prove it. Margaret slid Darlene's statement across the desk. The notary admits she never met Mr. Moreno. She violated protocol under pressure from Edwin Carver. She's willing to testify. Silva read the statement, his expression unreadable, then sealed everything in an evidence bag, a case number scrawled on a sticky note. Sign a statement affirming you never authorized this, he said. I signed, my handwriting firm, unmistakable, nothing like the scrawl Edwin had attempted. As we left the station, Margaret touched my arm. This is moving fast. They'll be called in for questioning soon. Stay sharp. I nodded, the weight of the folder lighter, now its burden shared with the law. But the shadow in my mind grew heavier. Lucretia's voice, old man find a shelter, echoed not just cruel but laced with something deeper, a resentment I couldn't place. I drove back to the apartment, the city's skyline a jagged silhouette against the dusk, and wondered what I'd missed in her heart all those years. The next morning Silva called. We're bringing them in tomorrow for questioning. Routine, we'll say, just clarifying property documents. They won't know it's a criminal investigation yet. Perfect, I said, my pulse quickening. The trap was closing, but I knew they wouldn't go quietly. Edwin was desperate. Lucretia complicit, and desperation bred mistakes, but also danger. The interrogation happened the next day. Silva kept me updated later, painting the scene in vivid detail. Edwin went first, escorted to a small room with gray walls and a bolted metal table. He wore jeans and an untucked shirt, his confidence a thin veneer. Silva started easy. Tell me about your relationship with Granville Moreno. 6 years, Edwin said, leaning back, arms crossed. Since I started dating Lucretia. Never got along, honestly. He's one of those guys who thinks nobody's good enough for his daughter. And the house, Silva asked, his pen poised. How'd you come to take possession? Edwin's grin faltered. Granville's 63, losing track of things. He told us he wanted us to have it, said it'd make him feel better knowing Lucretia was taken care of. We were doing him a favor. Silva nodded, letting Edwin talk for 18 minutes, each word a deeper hole. So he verbally gave you the house, directly told you? Absolutely, Edwin said, his confidence peaking. He was forgetting bills, leaving the stove on. Lucretia was worried. Silva opened his laptop, clicked play. Edwin's voice filled the room, aggressive, entitled, We own this place now, legal and everything. Selling it next week to clear my $340,000 in debts. Edwin's knuckles whitened as he gripped the table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That's out of context, he stammered. He was confused. We were just— What context makes that sound like a gift? Silva asked, his tone neutral but cutting. Edwin had no answer, his confidence crumbling. Lucretia was next, her yoga pants and zip-up jacket a casual defiance. She saw Edwin's face as she entered and launched into a defense before Silva spoke. He set us up. Dad planned this, leaving those documents out, going on that fishing trip. It's entrapment. Silva's expression didn't flicker. Entrapment requires law enforcement, ma'am. Your father's a private citizen. You chose to forge his signature. That's on you. Edwin slammed his palm on the table. Shut up, Lucretia. This was your idea. You wanted that house so bad you couldn't wait for him to die. He turned to Silva. We want a lawyer. We're done. Silva escorted them out through separate exits, standard procedure to prevent collusion. The fracture between them had begun a crack I'd anticipated, but hadn't expected to see so soon. I sat in my apartment replaying Silva's update in my mind, the city's hum a distant echo. They were unraveling, but the fight was far from over. 4 days later, the counterattack came. Jimmy Kowalski, Edwin's lawyer, was a name I knew from my prosecutor days, a shark in a $3,000 suit, all flash and no substance, but dangerous in a courtroom. His office on Westheimer Road screamed success plaques, artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Galleria. Edwin sat across from him, drained but eager, as Kowalski outlined his strategy. We don't defend the forgery, Kowalski said, tapping a pen on a legal pad. We attack Granville's credibility, make him the villain. Claim he's got dementia, manipulated Lucretia into spending her savings on house repairs he promised to reimburse. We file for emotional distress, elder abuse, a restraining order. Edwin leaned forward, hope flickering. Perfect. Granville's controlling, always right. This'll destroy him. Kowalski smirked, scribbling on a whiteboard, criminal defense, civil offense, PR campaign. The forgery's tough if the signature analysis holds, but we create doubt about his mental state. Civil courts, easier, lower burden of proof. And the PR already done. I set up an interview with the Houston Chronicle. Patricia Vance, human interest. Lucretia's ready. The interview took place in Kowalski's conference room. Lucretia, across from Patricia, a reporter with kind eyes and a recorder. Kowalski stood behind, nodding or shaking his head as Lucretia spoke. When she grew angry, he touched his temple, their signal. She switched to tears, her voice breaking. My father was always harsh, demanding. When he started forgetting things, I tried to help. He asked me to manage the house because he couldn't. Now he's using his prosecutor tricks to make me look like a criminal. Patricia leaned forward, sympathetic. That must be painful, having your father accuse you. Is his age a factor? I think he's confused, scared, Lucretia said, her tears perfect. Maybe he doesn't remember giving me the house. It terrifies me that his mind's going, and instead of letting me help, he's lashing out. The article hit 2 days later, page B4 of the Houston Chronicle. Daughter claims elderly father's prosecution is elder abuse gone wrong. Lucretia's photo. Eyes, red tissue in hand, stared out from the page. I read it in my apartment, my morning coffee growing cold. Each accusation stung memory problems, begging her to handle affairs doesn't remember. Kowalski's hand was clear in every line, crafting a narrative to paint me as the villain, a confused old man bullying his daughter. The social fallout was immediate, like paper cuts accumulating. Patrick, my neighbor, stopped waving when I drove past, his eyes wary as if I carried a contagion. At the grocery store on Richmond Avenue, the cashier, who usually chatted about the weather, scanned my items in silence, her glance uncertain, wondering if the man buying coffee was a monster. My phone pinged with a text from Jerry Thornton, a former colleague. Saw the article. Hope you're okay. Sounds rough. Call if you need me. I typed back, thanks, Jerry. It's complicated. Justice takes time. That afternoon, a knock at my apartment door. A process server, A middle-aged woman with a clipboard handed me a 30-page counter-complaint. Kowalski had filed it in Harris County Civil Court. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Financial elder abuse. A restraining order claims Lucretia spent $30,000 on house repairs I'd promised to reimburse. Lies, all of it. I signed for the documents, closed the door, and called Margaret. "I got served?" I said, my voice steady despite the weight in my chest. "Me too," she said, papers rustling in the background. "Kowalski's good. That article's poisoned. The well, 3 people called me today, asking if you have dementia. The preliminary hearing's 6 weeks away. This narrative could spread." "I know how defense attorneys work," I said. "They attack credibility when they can't fight facts. Let him write his fiction. The evidence doesn't care about newspapers." "True," Margaret said, "but public perception matters. If this goes to trial, we need jurors on your side. Right now, you're the villain, a powerful ex-prosecutor bullying his daughter. We need to counter this." I walked to the kitchen counter, opened the folder, and pulled out a document labeled Phase 2 Financial Records. "I have more evidence," I said. "Edwin's financial desperation debts beyond the $89,000 patterns showing he targeted my house. Kowalski doesn't know everything. Neither do you yet." Silence on the line. "What aren't you telling me?" Granville. I photographed the first page of the Phase 2 folder and sent it to her. "Insurance policies, plural. You'll see when the time's right. For now, let them think they're winning." 20 minutes later, Margaret's car pulled up outside my building. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her usual composure fraying. "Show me," she said, dropping her briefcase on the couch. "And it better be good. I don't like surprises from my own clients." I spread the Phase 2 documents across the table, a timeline from August 2024 to January 2025. Bank statements from Lucretia and Edwin's joint account, every suspicious transaction, highlighted $89,000 in 6 months drained on crypto, poker, and loans. "Edwin's bleeding her dry," I said, tapping the withdrawals. "I gave Lucretia that money for her salon. He gambled it away." Margaret's reading glasses slid down her nose as she traced the transactions. "You watched him do this," she said, her voice low. "You documented the pattern to show motive." "Exactly," I said. "This isn't about family. It's about his addiction, his desperation. It's why they targeted my house." She sat back, her eyes narrowing. "This man's drowning, and your house was his lifeboat. We show this to Silva, now it strengthens the case. Conspiracy to commit fraud, premeditation." "Agreed," I said. "But let me handle how we present it. The legality's solid, but we need to frame it right." We drove to Silva's office that afternoon, Margaret's silver Lexus cutting through downtown traffic. I reviewed the documents one last time, ensuring every transaction was clear. Silva stood when we entered, his handshake as firm as before. "Got something new?" he asked, eyeing the folder. Margaret arranged the financial records on his desk, explaining my emergency contact status and the legal access to the statements. Silva studied the pages, his reading glasses catching the light. "Edwin burned through $89,000 in 6 months. He said, his tone grim. "This explains the desperation. You weren't just gathering forgery evidence, you're building a conspiracy case." "Not RICO," I said, "but fraud with premeditation. The financials prove it wasn't impulsive." Silva leaned back, his chair creaking. "I'll contact the creditors. If Pinnacle Capital or others confirm he mentioned your house as collateral, it shows intent. Give me 3 days." Those 3 days were a masterclass in patience. I stayed in the apartment, organizing my thoughts, resisting the urge to check on the house. Silva called on the 3rd afternoon. "Granville, your son-in-law's in deeper than we thought. Debts closer to $470,000. 5 weeks before your fishing trip, he tried to mortgage your house. Bank rejected him for signature fraud." I stood pacing to the window. "He tried to mortgage it first. When that failed, he went for outright theft." "Exactly," Silva said. "Based on the creditor timeline, he's been planning this for months. I'm pulling phone records to see if he intercepted the bank's verification attempts. If he did, that's obstruction. I opened my laptop, typed a new document. Timeline update loan application fraud. Dates amounts. Silva's words all saved and emailed to Margaret. Subject line, The noose tightens. The city's lights flickered outside, a reminder of the stakes. They thought they'd outsmarted me, but they were playing my game. The pressure wasn't just legal now, it was social, personal. The Chronicle article spread like wildfire, neighbors whispering, old friends texting concern. My phone buzzed with another message from Jerry Hang in their Granville. Truth comes out. I didn't reply. Truth was my weapon, but it was a lonely one. Late that night, I stood at the apartment's window, the city a tapestry of light and shadow. The oak tree in my backyard haunted me, its roots a symbol of what I was fighting for. Lucretia's betrayal wasn't just about the house. It was about erasing me, my legacy, my life with Ellen. I wondered again what drove her, what resentment had festered into this. The mystery gnawed, but I pushed it aside. The evidence was my shield, my sword, and I was ready for the next battle. The Midtown apartment was a sanctuary of shadows, its single window framing Houston's restless skyline as night settled over the city. I sat at the kitchen table, the Moreno evidence file open before me, its pages a testament to 3 months of vigilance. The weight of Lucretia's betrayal lingered like a bruise, but the prosecutor in me thrived on the clarity of evidence. The audio of Edwin's confession, the security footage of their document theft. Darlene's statement. The bank records, Patrick's photos, the mailbox video. Each piece tightened the net around them, but the game wasn't over. Edwin and Lucretia were desperate now, and desperation bred mistakes I was counting on. The Chronicle article had done its damage, painting me as a confused old man tormenting his daughter. Neighbors avoided my gaze. Old colleagues sent cautious texts, but I held firm, anchored by the truth in my folder. Detective Silva's call about Edwin's failed mortgage attempt, $470,000 in debts, a rejected loan application 5 weeks before my fishing trip had confirmed their premeditation. The noose was tightening, but I knew they'd thrash before it closed. And thrash they did. 4 days after their interrogation, the first crack appeared. My phone buzzed at 6:30 a.m., a voicemail from Marcus Herman, the antique dealer I'd contacted weeks ago. His voice was steady but urgent. Granville, someone tried to sell your Victorian settee and Chippendale table yesterday. Said they were his. I recognized the pieces from our 2010 deal. Thought you should know? I stood the apartment's stillness, amplifying my pulse. The settee and table, worth $15,000, were heirlooms. Ellen had loved their polished wood, etched with memories of better days. Edwin's audacity to sell them was a gift, a reckless move that would add theft to his charges. I called Marcus back, my voice calm but deliberate. Was it Edwin Carver? My son-in-law matched the description you gave, Marcus said. Nervous guy, silver Lexus, kept checking his phone. I told him I'd need to verify ownership. He got antsy, said he'd come back later. I haven't seen him since. Did you document it? I asked. Detailed records, Marcus said. Photos of him in my shop, his contact info, the whole pitch. I don't deal with thieves, Granville. If you need me to testify, I'm in. I thanked him. My mind already racing. I called Silva, relaying the details. Edwin tried to sell my furniture, $15,000 worth. Marcus Herman's got records, photos, and he's willing to testify. This is theft, intent to liquidate my assets. Silva's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. He didn't move the items off the property, but the attempt shows intent. Send me Herman's statement and your certificates of authenticity. I'll add theft to the complaint. I emailed the documents to Silva and Margaret. Marcus's photos, the 2010 purchase receipts, the certificates for the settee and table. Another thread in the net, another nail in Edwin's coffin. But the shadow in my mind grew darker. Why the furniture? Why now Edwin's debts explained the desperation, but Lucretia's role gnawed at me. She wasn't just following his lead. Her nod in the footage, her voice on the call, "This is our house now," carried a weight I couldn't decipher. Was it greed or something deeper, a resentment rooted in years I'd overlooked? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the evidence. That evening, Patrick texted again. "Granville, your house was lit up last night." Edwin carrying boxes to his car, Lucretia yelling at him to put them back. Looked like a fight. "You okay?" The attached photo showed Edwin in my driveway, a box in his arms. Lucretia on the porch, her face twisted in anger. Timestamp: 10:22 p.m. I typed back, "Thanks, Patrick, I'm handling it. Keep me posted." I saved the photo, my jaw tightening. They were cracking under pressure, their unity fraying. I called Margaret, updating her. "Edwin's trying to liquidate assets. Lucretia's fighting him. They're falling apart." "Good," she said. "Desperate people make stupid moves." This furniture stunt destroys Kowalski's concerned family narrative. But be careful, Edwin's got nothing to lose now. She was right. Desperation was a wildfire, and Edwin was burning. The next morning my phone rang. Silva, his voice taut. "Granville, we've got a development." Darlene Webb came in voluntarily. "She's ready to sign an affidavit about the notarization." I drove to the police headquarters, the city's morning bustle a blur. Darlene sat in a small conference room, her hands twisting a purse strap. Silva sat across from her, his notebook open. "Ms. Webb," he said, "walk me through January 28th. Every detail." Darlene's voice trembled. It was 2:30 p.m. Edwin and Lucretia came into my office. Edwin was nervous, pacing, checking his watch. Lucretia did the talking, said her father was too frail to come inside, showed me a photo of an elderly man in a car. She called him Daddy. I notarized the signature on the power of attorney. It was already signed. I know I shouldn't have. "Did you see Granville Moreno in person?" Silva asked. "No," she whispered. I messed up. Edwin pressured me, said they were in a rush. Silva made notes. "You're cooperating, Ms. Webb. If you testify and sign an affidavit, the DA will recommend suspending your notary commission, not criminal charges. Deal?" "Yes," she said, tears spilling. "I'll testify. I want to make this right." Later that day, Silva pulled Lucretia's phone records, finding her search for elderly man in car stock photo 2 days before the notarization. The exact image was in her browser cache, a stranger, not me. I added the metadata to the folder, another piece locking into place. The net was nearly closed, but Edwin wasn't done. 3 days later, he made his boldest mistake. At 6:30 a.m., Silva called, his voice urgent. "Granville Edwin's on the move. He's heading south on Highway 59 toward Laredo, $8,000 in cash from maxed-out credit cards. CBP flagged him at the border checkpoint. My alert from last week triggered. He's in custody." I stood the apartment's walls closing in. "He tried to flee, tried and failed," Silva said. "I'm driving to Laredo to arrest him for attempting to evade prosecution. Bail's set at $150,000. He won't make it." I paced to the window, the city's lights, a distant hum. Edwin's flight was a confession of guilt, a desperate sprint from a trap he couldn't escape. But Lucretia's silence worried me more. She hadn't run, hadn't called, hadn't shown her hand. I texted Margaret. "Edwin's detained at Laredo. Flight attempt. Where's Lucretia?" Her reply came fast. "She's at your house per Patrick. No movement yet. Stay put. I'll meet you tomorrow." That night I couldn't sleep. The oak tree in my backyard haunted my thoughts, its roots a symbol of the life I was fighting for. Lucretia's betrayal wasn't just about the house. It was about erasing me, my legacy, my years with Ellen. I remembered her as a child climbing that tree, her laughter echoing through the yard. What had turned that girl into this? The mystery gnawed a puzzle with missing pieces. At 9:47 p.m., my phone rang. Lucretia Mobile on the screen. I let it ring, my heart pounding, then answered, saying nothing. Her voice broke the silence, raw and desperate. "Daddy, please." It was Edwin's idea, all of it. He manipulated me. I was scared of him. I can testify against him, help you. Just don't let them send me to prison. I'm your daughter. I counted to 5, letting her words hang. The prosecutor in me wanted to dissect her plea, to parse every syllable for truth. The father in me felt the wound reopen. "Lucretia," I said, my voice steady. "You called me a homeless old man. You stood by while Edwin planned to sell my house for his debts. You forged my signature, changed my locks. You chose this." "I know," she sobbed. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. Can't we—" "You're 36, I said. "You made your choices. I made mine. You'll have your day in court." I ended the call, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. I walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window. Houston's night sky, a canvas of stars and secrets. One moment of grief washed over me, not regret but acknowledgement that my daughter was lost, not to the law, but to herself. I texted Margaret. Lucretia called, begging forgiveness. I declined. She'll try for a deal now. Be ready. The next morning, Margaret met me at the apartment, her briefcase brimming with notes. "Edwin's in Harris County Jail," she said. "Lucretia's attorney reached out about a plea deal, probation for testimony against Edwin. You okay with that?" "Only if it includes full restitution and a 5-year no-contact order," I said. "I don't care if she avoids prison. I want my house, my dignity, and her out of my life." Margaret nodded, scribbling. "Reasonable. I'll tell the DA." That afternoon, Patrick sent another photo, Lucretia loading boxes into her sedan, her face pale, defeated. Timestamp, 11:45 a.m. The sheriff had enforced the eviction order. Judge Morrison's ruling, after the forensic reports, confirmed the forgery and my mental clarity. They had 48 hours to vacate. I drove to the house at 2 p.m., meeting Margaret in the driveway. She handed me a spare key, its weight a small victory. I unlocked the front door, stepping into a house that felt both mine and foreign. The Victorian settee's leg was broken, upholstery torn. Hardwood floors bore deep gouges. 2 windows were cracked, the master bedroom reeking of water damage. For 3 hours I documented everything: 147 photos, 12 minutes of video, a written inventory of damage. Living room floor, I narrated into my phone. Gouges a 1/4 inch deep. Intentional destruction. Margaret watched, her expression grim. "This is vandalism. We'll add it to the civil suit. Get contractor estimates." By week's end, the estimates totaled $28,400, floor refinishing, window replacement, plumbing, furniture, restoration, painting. I sent the documents to Margaret, each one a brick in the wall I was building. Edwin's flight, Lucretia's plea, the damaged house, they were unraveling faster than I'd anticipated, but the mystery of Lucretia's motives lingered. Why had she gone so far? Was it Edwin's pressure, or something buried in our past? That night, Silva called with an update. Lucretia's salon fired her. Clients lost trust after the article. She's moved to a studio in Spring Branch. Edwin's still in jail, no bail. The case is solid. Granville. I stood at the window, the city's lights a reminder of the stakes. The oak tree in my mind loomed, its roots deep, unyielding. They'd tried to uproot me, but their mistakes had only strengthened my resolve. The net was closed, the trap sprung, but the shadow of Lucretia's betrayal remained a puzzle I wasn't sure I'd ever solve. The Harris County Criminal Courthouse loomed over downtown Houston, its concrete facade as unyielding as the truth I'd spent months building. Inside courtroom 12 was a familiar arena, wood-paneled walls, rows of benches worn smooth by years of spectators. The judge's bench elevated like a throne. I sat in the front row, the Moreno evidence file, now in the hands of the prosecution. Its contents a weapon honed to perfection. The air smelled of polished oak and nervous sweat, a scent I'd breathed for 35 years as a prosecutor. Today I was the plaintiff, the victim, but my resolve was as sharp as ever. Margaret Chen sat beside me, her dark suit a stark contrast to the chaos of the past weeks. Her briefcase held copies of everything: the audio of Edwin's confession, the security footage, Darlene's affidavit, Patrick's photos, the bank records, the mailbox video, the vandalism estimates. Each piece was a thread in the net I'd woven, and now it was time to pull it tight. Across the aisle, Edwin and Lucretia sat with Jimmy Kowalski, their lawyer, his $3,000 suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Edwin's face was pale, his eyes darting to the exit, while Lucretia stared at the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The fracture between them was visible, a crack I'd predicted months ago. Judge Elena Morrison entered her robes, flowing her presence, commanding silence. She was a veteran known for cutting through legal theatrics with surgical precision. Case number 2025 CR 8472. State of Texas versus Edwin Carver and Lucretia Moreno, she announced. Charges: forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, vandalism, and attempted evasion of prosecution for Mr. Carver. Let's begin. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Rachel Nguyen, stood, her voice clear and deliberate. Your Honor, the state will prove that Edwin Carver and Lucretia Moreno conspired to forge a power of attorney to steal Granville Moreno's $580,000 home, changed the locks, attempted to sell his property, and vandalized it when their scheme unraveled. We have audio, video, financial records, and witness testimony. Kowalski rose, his smile polished but strained. Your Honor, this is a family dispute exaggerated by a vindictive father. Mr. Moreno, a former prosecutor, manipulated his daughter and son-in-law, exploiting their concern for his mental decline. We'll show he's confused, possibly suffering from early dementia, and that Lucretia acted to protect him. I felt Margaret's hand tense on my arm, but I kept my gaze forward. Kowalski's narrative was a desperate gambit, one I'd anticipated. The truth didn't need theatrics, it needed evidence, and I had it in spades. Nguyen called her first witness, me. I took the stand, my posture steady, my voice calm. Under oath, I recounted the timeline, Lucretia's probing questions in November, Edwin's late-night visits, the forged power of attorney, the changed locks, the audio of Edwin's confession. Nguyen played the recording, his voice echoing through the courtroom. We own this place now, legal and everything. Selling it next week to clear my $340,000 in debts. The jury leaned forward, their faces a mix of shock and disdain. Kowalski cross-examined, his tone smooth but predatory. Mr. Moreno, you're 63, correct? Any memory issues? Confusion? Perhaps? None, I said, meeting his gaze. I've passed 2 independent cognitive assessments in the past month, both submitted to the court. My memory's as sharp as it was when I prosecuted cases like this. He pivoted, undeterred. You left those documents on your kitchen table deliberately, didn't you? To trick your daughter. I left legal papers in my own home, I said. If they were tempted to steal them, that's on them, not me. A murmur rippled through the jury. Kowalski sat, his smile faltering. Nguyen called Darlene Webb next. The notary's hands shook as she took the stand, but her voice was steady. I notarized a power of attorney for Lucretia and Edwin on January 28th. I never saw Mr. Moreno. They showed me a photo of an elderly man in a car, said he was too frail to come in. I violated protocol. I'm sorry. Nguyen presented the affidavit. Then the phone records showing Lucretia's search for a stock photo of an elderly man. The jury's eyes narrowed, their notebooks filling with scribbles. Kowalski's cross-examination was weak, focusing on Darlene's remorse, rather than the facts, a sign he knew the evidence was crushing. Patrick, my neighbor, testified next, his voice warm but firm. I saw Edwin and Lucretia moving boxes, celebrating in Granville's house while he was gone. I took photos, Edwin with a box, Lucretia with a wine glass. Later I saw Edwin try to load the settee into his car, then put it back after Lucretia yelled at him. Nguyen displayed Patrick's photos on a screen. The timestamps stark, 10:22 p.m., 11:45 a.m. The courtroom was silent. The images, a silent accusation. Kowalski didn't cross-examine, a rare concession. Marcus Herman, the antique dealer, followed, detailing Edwin's attempt to sell my settee and table. He came to my shop on February 10th, claimed the pieces were his. I recognized them from Granville's 2010 purchase. I took photos, kept his contact info. He never came back. Nguyen presented Marcus's photos. Edwin's nervous posture unmistakable. The financial records came next, $89,000 in withdrawals from Lucretia and Edwin's joint account, tied to gambling and predatory loans. A creditor from Pinnacle Capital testified via video confirming Edwin's attempt to mortgage my house in December rejected for a forged signature. The mailbox video sealed it, Edwin and Lucretia opening the fake real estate letter, their excitement palpable. The state rested, and Kowalski's defense was a house of cards. Edwin took the stand, his voice shaky, claiming I'd verbally gifted the house due to memory lapses. Nguyen dismantled him in cross-examination, replaying the audio showing the forged documents and citing his flight to Mexico. "You fled to Laredo with $8,000 in cash," she said. "Was that to help your confused father-in-law?" Edwin stammered. His face flushed. "I panicked. I didn't mean—" "You meant to steal his house," Nguyen cut in. "The evidence proves it." Lucretia didn't testify, a strategic move by Kowalski to preserve her plea deal. Instead, he called a psychologist, Dr. Harold Vance, who claimed my actions suggested early cognitive decline. Nguyen countered with my cognitive assessments, both showing no impairment. Vance's testimony crumbled, his credibility shredded. Closing arguments were brief. Nguyen summarized the evidence, her voice a hammer. Granville Moreno built a case any prosecutor would envy. The defendants forged documents, changed locks, attempted to sell his home, and vandalized it when caught. The evidence is irrefutable. Kowalski's closing leaned on emotion, painting Lucretia as a victim of my manipulation, but the jury's faces were stone. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, a short eternity. I sat in the hallway, Margaret beside me. The oak tree in my mind, a constant presence. Its roots symbolized everything I'd fought for: my home, my legacy, Ellen's memory. Lucretia's betrayal was a wound, but the truth was my shield. The verdict came at 2:47 p.m. Judge Morrison read it aloud. On the charge of forgery, guilty. Conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. Theft, guilty. Vandalism, guilty. For Mr. Carver, attempted evasion of prosecution, guilty. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with finality. Edwin's head dropped. Lucretia's shoulders shook. Kowalski's face a mask of defeat. Sentencing followed immediately. Morrison's voice was steady. "Edwin Carver, you're sentenced to 4 years in state prison with credit for time served. Lucretia Moreno. The state has accepted your plea agreement, 3 years probation, full restitution of $28,400 for vandalism, and a 5-year no-contact order with Granville Moreno." I exhaled, the weight lifting but not gone. The house was mine again, the locks changed back, the damage repairable. But Lucretia's absence was a different kind of loss. I glanced at her as she left the courtroom, her eyes avoiding mine, a stranger in my daughter's skin. The mystery of her resentment lingered, a puzzle I might never solve. Margaret touched my arm. "You won Granville. Cleanly." "Not clean," I said, my voice low. "I lost her long before this." We walked to the parking garage, the city's pulse a distant hum. That evening I drove to the house, stepping inside for the first time since the eviction. The settee's torn upholstery, the gouged floors, the cracked windows, they were scars but fixable. I stood in the backyard, the oak tree towering under the dusk sky, its branches swaying like a silent promise. I'd won the battle, but the war for understanding Lucretia's heart was unfinished. The next day I met Silva at a diner near the courthouse, his handshake warm. "You built a hell of a case," he said, sipping coffee. "Most civilians would have folded under that Chronicle article." "It wasn't about revenge," I said. "It was about accountability. About what's mine." He nodded, his eyes knowing. You're a prosecutor at heart, Granville. Always will be. I drove back to the apartment, the folder now a relic of victory. The city's lights flickered, a constellation of truths and secrets. The oak tree in my mind stood firm, its roots deep, unyielding. I'd reclaimed my home, my dignity, but the shadow of Lucretia's betrayal remained a mystery. I'd carry a wound that might never heal. The memorial house stood quiet under the April sun, its scars healing as contractors worked to erase the damage. The gouged hardwood floors gleamed anew, refinished to their original walnut sheen. The cracked windows were replaced, their frames catching the morning light. The Victorian settee, its torn upholstery expertly mended, sat proudly in the living room, a testament to Ellen's taste and our shared years. I stood in the doorway, the Moreno evidence file, now stored in a safe, its purpose fulfilled. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility, but beneath it lingered the weight of what I'd lost, not just a house, but a daughter. The trial's verdict had been a clean victory, Edwin sentenced to 4 years, Lucretia bound by probation, restitution, and a 5-year no-contact order. The house was mine again. The locks changed back, the $28, $400 in damages covered by Lucretia's payments drawn from her dwindling salon savings. Yet as I walked through the restored rooms, the silence felt heavier than it should. The oak tree in the backyard loomed through the kitchen window, its branches swaying gently, a sentinel of memory and resilience. A week after the trial, a letter arrived at the house, forwarded from my midtown apartment. Lucretia's handwriting, once so familiar, stared up from the envelope. I stood at the kitchen counter, hesitating, the weight of her words already pressing against me. Inside was a single page, her script shaky but deliberate. Daddy, I'm sorry. I let Edwin's desperation consume me. I was angry at you for years, for always being the prosecutor, never just my father. I know I can't undo this. I hope you find peace. No signature, just a smudged tear stain. I read it twice, then folded it into the safe with the evidence file. Forgiveness was a bridge too far, not because I couldn't, but because she'd chosen to burn it. The no-contact order was a legal wall, but my heart had built its own. I thought of Ellen, her laughter in this kitchen, her hand on Lucretia's as they baked cookies under that oak tree. The mystery of Lucretia's resentment, her anger at my prosecutor's life, lingered, a puzzle half solved. Had I been too rigid, too focused on justice over love? The question hung unanswered, a shadow I'd carry. I stepped into the backyard, the grass soft under my boots. The oak tree stood tall, its roots deep, unyielding, a symbol of everything I'd fought for. I'd reclaimed my home, my dignity, but the cost was a daughter lost to choices I couldn't undo. I touched the tree's bark, rough and familiar, and felt a quiet peace settle. Not joy, not triumph, but acceptance, a hard-won serenity. The community began to thaw. Patrick, my neighbor, waved again, his eyes apologetic as he brought over a casserole. "Read the follow-up in the Chronicle," he said. "They got it wrong about you, Granville. I should have known." The article buried on page B6 detailed the trial's outcome. Clearing my name, retired prosecutor exonerated in family fraud case. Jerry Thornton, my old colleague, called his voice warm. "You fought like hell, Granville. Proud of you." I thanked him, hung up, and stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of amber and crimson. Houston hummed beyond the trees, its rhythm steady, indifferent to my battles. I thought of Detective Silva's words in the diner. "You're a prosecutor at heart." He was right. I'd built a case, dismantled lies, and won. But the victory was bittersweet, a justice tempered by loss. The next morning I met Silva at the diner near the courthouse, our ritual now a comfort. He slid into the booth, his coffee steaming. "House looking good?" he asked. "Better than before," I said. "Contractors did their job. Feels like mine again." He nodded, his eyes knowing. "And Lucretia, you read her letter?" I paused, the weight of it settling. "Yeah, she's sorry, says it was. Edwin says she was angry at me for years. Doesn't change what she did." Silva sipped his coffee. Family cases are the hardest. Justice doesn't fix the heart. I leaned back, the booth's vinyl creaking. It's not about fixing. It's about holding the line. She crossed it, and I had to. He smiled, a rare softness. That's why you won Granville. You don't bend. I drove home, the city's lights flickering like stars in a storm. The oak tree greeted me, its branches a quiet promise. I sat on the porch, a glass of water in hand, and let the evening settle. The house was whole, the scars faded, but the mystery of Lucrecia's heart remained a wound I'd carry, a truth I might never fully know. I raised the glass to the tree, to Ellen, to the man I'd become. The fight was over, but the story wasn't. I'd live on, rooted like the oak, unyielding in the face of betrayal.